The Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are all iconic movies in their own right, but there is one thing which connects each of these movies in a horrifying way. A man known to be one of the most notorious killers in all of American history. On November 16, 1957, police entered a home in search of a local missing woman and found what can only be described as a literal house of horrors, a home belonging to a killer so brutal he was dubbed the Butcher of Plainfield, who spent a decade killing and collecting human body parts. Buffalo Bill and Leatherface have serious issues with human flesh, and Norman Bates harbors a crazed obsession with his mother, but their real-life inspiration is a true horror of these parts. So let's dive in. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and let's go behind the horror with the Butcher of Plainfield himself, Ed Gein. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906 to Augusta and George Gein, and they lived together in La Crosse, Wisconsin, along with his older brother Henry. His father George was an alcoholic who was constantly reminded of his little self-worth by his wife Augusta, a heavily devout religious woman who ruled over the family like a tyrant. She believed evil and sin were all around them, particularly in women who she believed to be vessels of pure evil, and that socializing and drinking were instruments of the devil. She was a harsh bully who made sure her family knew she was in charge and they were beneath her, which in a weird way only caused Ed to become more obsessed with his mother. In 1915, Augusta moved the family from La Crosse to Plainfield, as she felt La Crosse was a sinkhole of filth and chose to live in an isolated farmhouse so that her two sons would not become corrupted by the evils of the town. She guarded her sons closely, only allowing them to venture from the farmhouse to attend school. And any time Ed would entertain the idea of making friends, Augusta would punish him for it, reminding him of the evils and corruption in the world. Ed had a speech impediment and a lazy eye, often coming home from school in tears after his classmates bullied him. His parents offered no support, with Augusta belittling him further and George physically assaulting him. Yet Ed continued to adore his mother, despite the cruelness of her convictions. George Gein died in 1940, and now adults Ed and Henry began to work odd jobs in the town. Whilst working these jobs together, Henry was very vocal about their mother with Ed and openly criticized her and her ways. Augusta had condemned Henry after he had built a relationship with the divorced mother of two children in the town. Henry's attempts to convince Ed of the evil in their mother were in vain, as Ed only idolized Augusta. And it is the fate of his brother Henry which has caused many to later question if he was indeed Ed's first victim. In 1944, Ed and Henry worked in a field near to their farmhouse. They set a fire to burn away marsh vegetation, which suddenly got out of control. When firefighters arrived, only Ed was there for them to talk to, and he advised that his brother had gone missing, assuming he had died in the fire. Later, police located the dead body of Henry. However, the condition in which the body was found only raised more questions. His body was found quite a distance away from the location of the fire, meaning it was unlikely that he had died of smoke inhalation, and his head was covered in mysterious bruises. A year after Henry's death, Ed lived with Augusta in their farmhouse until her death on December 12, 1945. Following his mother's death, Ed sealed up her bedroom to preserve his mother's memory, and also boarded up their family home, disappearing for a year. And it was in that time when Ed truly spiraled into madness. He spent this time cooped up alone, obsessing over horror novels, Nazi experiments, pornography, and the female anatomy, and hoarded books on taxidermy. In 1947, Ed began leaving his house to make trips to the Plainfield Cemetery. It was here where he started to put his studies of taxidermy into practice, as he dug up and stole bodies from the cemetery. Initially only collecting organs and body parts and returning their bodies to the graves afterwards, as time went on he decided to drag the bodies from the cemetery and keep them in his farmhouse. In 1954, Gein traveled 10 miles north of Plainfield to Pine Grove, and entered the local tavern where he met Mary Hogan, who worked there. He openly shot Hogan and dragged her body on a sled back to his home, and carried on stealing bodies from the local cemetery to conduct his vile acts of taxidermy. On November 16, 1957, Gein murdered Bernice Warden in her hardware store in Plainfield and took her body back to his home. Her son Frank Warden, a sheriff's deputy, went to check on his mother in her store and found only a trail of blood leading outside. He checked the register of sales in the store and found the last name registered there. Ed Gein. The day before, Frank had noticed Ed skulking around the store, and although he looked suspicious, he didn't have any cause to raise any investigation with him at that point. 8 hours after Bernice Warden was declared missing, Frank called the Plainfield police station to report Ed Gein, and although working from a hunch, advised them that it may be worth investigating. Police arrested Ed Gein as he was leaving a grocery store, and later that night, they investigated his home. It was then when they entered the true house of horrors. I must give warning here that what we're about to discuss contains very gruesome details of gore and violence. If you believe you may be affected by this, you may want to skip over this part. Consider this your warning. Police reportedly found the body of Bernice Warden hanging upside down from a beam in the barn, gutted and with her head missing. It was said that her body was so badly disfigured that they assumed it to be the body of an animal, realizing upon further investigation that it was actually human. When entering the main Gein house, they continued to find scenes of pure atrocity. A window shade made of human lips, chairs upholstered with human skin, masks made of human faces hanging on the walls, small bins and bowls made from human heads, a human heart set in a pan on the stove, and a box under Gein's bed filled with female body parts. In the fridge, they discovered a decaying human head, which they later identified as the head of Mary Hogan, who went missing 3 years earlier. They also found clothing made from human skin, including a belt made of nipples, tights forged from human legs, and a jacket fashioned also with a pair of women's breasts. And later, on November 17, 1957, Bernice Warden's head was found outside wrapped in a bloody sack, which Gein later admitted he was going to use as a decoration. After his arrest, Gein stated that he went into a dazed state and only ever imagined stealing bodies and committing murder. He never thought he would go through with it. The next day following his arrest, news had spread fast, and Gein's gruesome crimes had become widely known. In January 1958, Gein was admitted into the Wisconsin Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, following an earlier plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. It would be a whole 10 years later that Gein would finally be prosecuted. On November 14, 1968, Gein was deemed medically fit to stand trial and was charged with first-degree murder. He avoided the death penalty and instead was sentenced to the Central State Hospital. A writer who caught wind of Gein's crimes and followed the case closely was that of Robert Bloch, who some of you may know as the author of the infamous novel Psycho, which was released in 1959. He was fascinated by Gein's obsessive nature with his mother and incorporated his obsession into his characters Norman Bates and his mother Norma. In an essay written by Bloch, he gave a detailed account of Gein's crimes and highlights his inspiration in Psycho. Quote, "The concept proved so intriguing that I immediately set about planning a novel dealing with such a character. In order to provide him with a supply of potential victims, I decided to make him a motel operator. Then came the ticklish question of what made him tick, the matter of motivation. The Oedipus motif seemed to offer a valid answer, and the transvestite theme appeared to be a logical extension. The novel which evolved was called Psycho. As Gein's crimes grew in popularity by wide media coverage, in 1974, a lesser-known director at the time, Tobe Hooper, took inspiration from Gein in his movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Namely, this is seen in his character Leatherface and the wearing of human flesh, which of course Gein had become well known for as part of his crimes. In the documentary series A to Z of Horror, Hooper shares how he came to know of Gein, quote, "My relatives that lived in a town close to Ed Gein told me these terrible stories, these tales of human skin lampshades and furniture and such. A little bit of grave robbing, I think. I didn't really know the man's name. I didn't even know about Ed Gein. I just knew something that had happened that was horrendous. But that image really stuck, and I grew up with that kind of burning in my mind." Author Thomas Harris was also inspired by Gein when writing his book The Silence of the Lambs in 1988, as seen in the character Buffalo Bill and his capturing of women to murder and creating a bodysuit out of their skin. John Douglas, a retired FBI agent of whom Harris audited his criminal psychology class and based his character Jack Crawford on, gave an interview in 1999 discussing Harris's inspiration for the character Buffalo Bill. Quote, "I think it's more scary that there are people like Buffalo Bill. He is a composite of 3 killers who Harris learned about in a lecture. Ted Bundy, a guy from Plainview, Wisconsin who killed a couple of people, dug up the graves of a couple more, and he'd skin them and preserve the flesh in motor oil, and he would slip them on himself. Face masks, he had half a dozen of them. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died from lung cancer in Mendota Mental Health Institute at the age of 77. And in a cruel twist of fate, his body was laid to rest in Plainfield Cemetery, the very location where he stole bodies from for his grisly taxidermy over the course of 10 years. The crimes of Ed Gein are notorious in their unique, gruesome fashion, but the question still remains over the death of his brother Henry. Was he indeed Ed's first victim? There are points for and against this theory. Gein was apparently not motivated to kill and perform taxidermy until after his mother's death, which was presumably the breaking point that triggered his descent into madness. And his brother's body was not found mutilated in the way of his other victims. However, Gein did cherish Augusta, and Henry speaking ill of their mother could have caused Gein to snap and enter what could have been the first of his dazed states. We will likely never know. However, it is clear that the impact of Gein is felt in the horror movie genre, as his monstrous legacy went on to inspire some of the best horror franchises of all time that continue to both terrify and entertain casual viewers and horror fanatics alike. And there we have it, my fellow horror fans, our behind the horror look at Ed Gein. But please do let us know down in the comments of any of the horror franchises that you'd like us to take a look behind the horror at. And while you're there, make sure you give us a like and a cheeky subscribe. If you want to follow me on socials, I am at Strone87 across all social media. Come and say hello to me on there. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, take care.